All right, so the question today is, why is the wind against me? Have you ever been, going through life and it seems like the wind is always against you, at least in this season? You're like, I don't know why the wind's against me. I feel like I'm doing everything right. Okay, but let's look at, for instance, for me, in the last couple of weeks, I was starting to go on a diet. And sure enough, that week, I've got a friend of mine calls me twice that week, invites me out to lunch, offers to pay. We have a sales meeting, and they've got this giant spread of food at the sales meeting, which is unusual. And I'm thinking, it's just because I said I'm going on a diet, everybody's throwing food at me everywhere I look. So we're trying to get our finances in order. I'm starting to redo our budget and tighten some things up a little bit. And sure enough, the air conditioner goes out. The weirdest thing, the fan blade broke on the air conditioner. Not the fan motor, the blade actually fell off and went flying around. That doesn't happen. The pool sprung a leak. And it's going to cost $300 to fix it, and it's probably cost us hundreds of dollars in a water bill because we keep having to fill it up. What else? Ethan's computer broke in the last week. I had to take it in to get repaired. I thought the guy told me it was going to be $60. When I picked it up, it was magically $160. So sometimes it can feel like the wind is against you. Okay? There's a few reasons why the wind might be against you. One of them is kind of obvious. You're operating in opposition to the will of God. Okay? This one makes sense. If you're going against God, you can kind of expect the wind to be against you, right? Yeah. Okay, I know nobody else has ever gone in opposition to the will of God. I'm the only one that might have ever done this. I can think of one time, so I'm going to tell you one story. Back around 2004, I was part of a partnership in a flooring company, and God had quite clearly told me to get out of that situation and go somewhere else. Well, that situation was nice and comfy, and I didn't want to go anywhere else. But I clearly heard God tell me to move. And I didn't. I was in opposition to the will of God. And sure enough, the wind picked up pretty fast. And so crazy things were going wrong. People were making up stuff, lying about me. I hear other people talk about this kind of thing. You made up this and made up. I'm like, people don't just run around making up stuff about people. But I was walking it out. I'm like, oh, maybe they do, because they're doing it now. And financial catastrophe, one after the other, bam, bam, bam. And finally I said, all right, I give up, I'll move. And I did. And once I did, God showed up, the wind quit blowing, and everything was better. Anybody think of anybody in the Bible who's had this situation happen to them? Jonah. Let's take a look at Jonah real quick. It says, the word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai, and told him to go to the city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness had come up before me. But Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish. He went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port. After paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. Then the Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break up. I'm going to skip down here to verse 10. It says, this terrified them, and they asked Jonah, what have you done? They knew he was running from the Lord because he had already told them so. The sea was getting rougher and rougher, so they asked him, what should we do to make the seas calm down for us? And Jonah said, pick me up and throw me in the sea, he replied, and it will become calm. I know that it is my fault and that this great storm has come upon you. And then down, they tried to get around it, like, no, we don't want to throw you overboard, that's a little rough. But a few minutes later they said, okay, we'll throw you overboard. And so they took Jonah and they threw him overboard, and the raging sea grew calm. Okay, so this story makes all the sense in the world, right? Completely cut and dry. You run from God, you can expect a storm. But sometimes the wind is against you and you're not running from God. You're doing all you think you can do. You're praying, you're listening, you're trying to walk it out the best you can, but the wind is still against you. So let's take a look at that. Sometimes the wind will be against you in spite of operating with the will of God. Let's take a look in Matthew 14 and look at Peter. We've all seen the story of Peter walking on the water. Let's take a look at that story a little bit. And it said, this is right after Jesus had fed the 5,000. And they were packing up, and Jesus told the disciples to go on ahead of them to the other side. And so immediately Jesus made the disciples get in the boat and go ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Okay, so they were doing exactly what God had told them to do. He said, go to the other side. They got it and they went. Yet the wind was against them. Sometimes when you think something is working against you, it's actually working for you. But it takes the perspective of the end of the story to understand that. Okay, perhaps they needed to understand that when God says go to the other side, you will get to the other side and you can't be harmed. God said go there, you're going to get there. Okay, and the season they were about to walk into, perhaps they needed that lesson. Okay, what if in our day those guys had the Weather Channel or the Weather Bug app on their phone, and Jesus told them to go to the other side, and they checked their phone and the weather says there's going to be a big storm? Maybe they wouldn't have gotten in the boat. Maybe they wouldn't have gone to the other side. Maybe they wouldn't have listened to the Word of God. They would have paid attention to what they saw, and even the forecast of the wind. Not even the wind, but just the anticipation of the wind would have kept them from walking out what God had asked them to do. How many times do we check the weather? Worse than check the weather. Check the weather, I'll give you. It makes a little bit of sense to check the weather. But we watch the weather. There's a storm, there's a depression off the coast of Africa, 5 bazillion miles away, and we're glued to our computer screen watching the spaghetti strings, for something that's going to maybe happen in 3 weeks. And you go to Publix and all the water's gone off the shelves for the anticipation of the storm that never even shows up. And that's how we run our life. We're always looking for what if the wind is, forget when the wind is against you, just thinking the wind might be against you. Okay, so sometimes you get a forecast, you get the opinions of others that tell you it's going to be trouble ahead. There's going to be wind against you. You might not want to do that, regardless of what you think God told you to do. Okay, and that's one way we can forecast the wind against us. Other people don't even need to ask anybody else's opinion. They don't need to see any signs. They don't need to see the Weather Channel. They just consistently imagine in their head that the wind is going to be against me. I can't do that. That's never going to work. That's not going to work. I can't do that. And they just make up wind. That's even worse. Okay, but sometimes the wind is actually for your benefit. Yes. Think about an airplane. An airplane needs the wind to be against it in order to take off. It needs the wind to be against it in order to land. Not absolutely necessary, but that's the best way to do it. Okay? Look at a sailboat. Sailboats, in the original sailboats, they made these big square sails, and you had to have the wind with you to go anywhere, because that's how they operated. The wind pushed them from the back. Well, shortly they recognized that if you make the sailboat sail like the wing of an airplane, it'll actually create lift and pull you through the water, even faster than the wind blows. So if the wind is somewhat against you, your sailboat can go faster than if the wind is for you. So having the wind against you can actually be for you. We see in the Word that iron sharpens iron. Yes. Okay? So we know that sharpen is to make it better. Okay? So iron makes iron better, sharpens it. Ethan's a sharp kid. That's a good thing, right? Or Chris Kyle's a sharpshooter from the American Sniper. He's a good shot. He's a sharp shooter. That's a good thing. But how many of you know people that are not that sharp? And you would refer to them as perhaps not the sharpest tool in the shed. Not the sharpest knife in the drawer. Okay? We all know people like this as well. And perhaps they've not had enough hard things rub up against them.
Yeah.
And therefore, they're not the sharpest knife in the drawer.
Yeah.
So hard things make hard things better. Okay? Look at weightlifting or exercise. You lift the weight, it gives you resistance. You have to push back against it. And even the day or so after you get done lifting weights, you're sore, you feel bad. But a couple days later, you experience the benefit of that. I know in high school playing football, we had these 2-a-day football practices that were straight from the pit of hell. And our coaches thought we were a track team, and we would just run until like half the team threw up, and then that was enough. Okay, so the really fit guys never threw up, but like the linemen onto like the tight ends, they would be throwing up for sure. And this we thought was against us for sure. But when we get into football season, we were a smaller team than most of the teams we played. But what we had on our side was endurance because of what had been against us that was now for us. It put us in better condition than all the other teams. So in the fourth quarter, they were all throwing up and we were running circles around them. So it worked out for us. And that is always the way it is. Okay? So you can probably think of those times when everything just seemed to be against you. A time when you knew you were running from God. Okay? Or a time when you knew you were doing what God wanted you to do and the wind was still against you. Okay? But you could look back in hindsight and see that it was actually working for you. Because everything works. It either works for you or it works on you.
Yes.
And that's easily said after the end of the story. Okay? When I was going through my nightmare in 2004, I didn't feel that way. In 2005, when I could look back and see the result, the end of the story, then it all made sense. Say, well, what good does that do me in the middle of the storm, in the middle of the wind, because I can't see the end of the story? Well, there is somebody who can see the end of the story. And it's not you.
Yeah.
And you can't see it, but you can hear it if you listen for it. Let me give you an example. Pastor Marvin, can you come up here for a second? All the way up here. I want you to stand back here. Okay? Now I'm going to ask everybody out here, how many fingers do I have up behind my back? Close. Okay? All right. What if you could hear how many fingers I have up behind my back by listening to the source who can see what you can't see? So, how many fingers do I have up behind my back?
2.
Okay. If you trust the source, do you think I really had 2 or do you think he lied? Do you trust him?
Yes.
Good. If you trust him, how much more should you trust God, who's not going to lie to you? Okay? Only God can see behind my back. You can't go by what you see. You have to put more focus on what you hear God say. Okay, thank you. When you're playing baseball, I played a lot of baseball when I was in high school, and a guy's on first base, somebody hits the ball into right field, and he's going to round second base on his way to third base, and he doesn't know if he should run home yet, or if that ball is going to be caught quickly and thrown back into home plate and get him out. What he doesn't want to do is look back. You don't want to look back when you're trying to run home.
That's right.
Okay, you want focused in front of you,
Yeah.
running as fast as you possibly can. You don't see Usain Bolt running a 100-yard dash, looking behind him to see who's there.
That's right.
No, he's looking straight ahead, running as fast as he can. That's what the base runner has to do.
Yeah.
He has to trust the third base coach, who has full view of the field,
Yeah.
to see whether the right fielder picked up the ball cleanly and is about to throw him out,
Yeah.
or if it got past him and went to the fence and he needs to keep running home. In baseball, that guy better not look back to find out what's happening. He better look straight at the third base coach and do whatever he tells him to do. And that is the way we need to run our lives. God is our third base coach, and if he tells you to run home, you run home.
Yes.
Okay, you notice when Jesus told Peter to walk on the water, come out to him, he didn't give him a long explanation of how it was going to work. He simply said, come. The directions we would give to a dog. Come. That's all he said.
Yes.
And Peter didn't say, how's that going to work? Peter didn't say, let me put my flippers on, see if that'll help. Let me get a raft. No, he just followed the directions. Okay? Once he got out there, obviously, he put his eyes on the wind, forgot what God said, and started to sink. And that's what we do as well. Anytime you hear something, it's easy to renegotiate what you heard. Okay? Was that God? Is that God that told me that? Maybe God changed his mind. He's thinking something else now, because this is kind of hard. So maybe God's changed his mind about what he wants me to do. Let's take a look at Romans 8:28 real quick. And we know that all things work together for the good of them that love the Lord, to them that are called according to his purpose. Okay? What feels different about it now that we can see the end of the story? We have to trust the one who does see the end of the story. Okay? Let's look at what else God has to say about this situation. Proverbs 3:5-6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding, in all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy path." Okay? Numbers 23:19. Numbers 23:19, verse 19. "God is not a man that he should lie, neither the son of man that he should repent. Hath he said, and shall he not do it? Or hath he spoken, and shall he not make it good?" You can trust him. Maybe we all trust Pastor Marvin. We know him, he's a good guy, we trust him. But you can certainly trust God. Okay? And he can see the things that you can't see. And he simply has to tell you about them. So you have to listen to his words. Okay, so I challenge you this week to take what you've heard God say, what you know he's said, and write it down so that you can't renegotiate with yourself. Because when you hear something, it's so easy to misremember it, especially if it's something difficult. You're going to be encouraged to misremember what you heard. Okay? We renegotiate and we reconsider what we've heard. What we need to do is, as soon as we hear it, write it down, and instead of reconsidering it, we need to pre-consider it. Okay? Don't reconsider what God tells you. Pre-consider what God has told you and what you're going to do. Okay? I think back to 23 years ago, approximately, when I quit drinking. Decided never to have another drink again. And I wasn't some crazy raging alcoholic or anything. I just drank more than I should. And decided one day, I am a person who no longer drinks. I didn't have a reason. I didn't have an explanation. I didn't say, I'm not going to drink anymore so I don't have to have a headache going into work on Monday. No, what's that do about Friday night? You start renegotiating with yourself and say, well, you don't have to get up on Saturday, go have a few drinks. I'm not going to drink because of this or that. You'll find a way to renegotiate it. So I pre-considered at a certain time that I would never drink again. I pre-considered when I was a teenager that I would never smoke. And those things, from that day, I was never tempted to drink again. I can't say that works for everybody, but for me, those two instances I can think of that I absolutely pre-considered, predetermined who I was as a person, it was never a thought for me again. I didn't have to explain it to anybody. Just, oh, no thanks, I don't drink. That was it. So, be determined in what God told you to walk it out. Okay? Don't reconsider it. Don't renegotiate it. And the easy way to do that is to write it down. Okay? Let's take a look at Hebrews real quick. And I'm wrapping this up here shortly. Hebrews 12, verse 1 through 3. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders us and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Okay? So consider Jesus' example when you're trying to walk out what God has told you to do, and that will help you to persevere. Persevere is the word that stands out to me in that verse. Okay? A couple of them. Let us run with perseverance. What are we doing when we're running? We're taking action. Okay? Let us take action with perseverance, persistence, the race marked out for us. So God has marked out a race for us, given us a destination, and we are to persevere through it. Sometimes I've thought that when I'm having a rough time and I stop to think of somebody less fortunate than I am, that's a way to negotiate it, to navigate it, feel better about the situation I'm in by looking at somebody else less fortunate than I am. And I haven't really understood or thought that was a godly principle. Maybe it's almost a cop-out. Okay, yeah, you're suffering this, but as long as you look at somebody that's doing worse, you can feel better about yourself. And I've kind of been conflicted about that, even though I think we all do it to a certain extent. You look at somebody less fortunate, and now you feel better about your situation. Well, God tells us right here, consider, think about who endured such opposition. Think about how less fortunate Jesus was in his situation compared to what you're going through. So it is a godly principle. It is okay to look at somebody that's in a less fortunate situation than you are in order to help yourself be grateful for the situation that you're into and to persevere and be persistent. And I think of persistence, I think of this funny show that, I don't know if anybody, I know nobody in this room has ever seen The Big Bang Theory, but some heathens on Facebook perhaps, and not me, but I've heard from my wife that it's a pretty funny show. And she tells me a story about a guy in the show named Raj. I'm almost done here. So there's this guy Raj on the show, and he has a difficult time with the ladies. Okay? But he's got this one cleaning lady in his office that he's trying to ask out. And he asks her out like 3 or 4 times, and she keeps telling him no. And finally she says, you know what? You sure are persistent. And he says, it's my one move. Okay. If you're going to have one move, let your one move be persistence.
Yes.
Okay? Don't give up.
Yes.
Keep moving forward. You can't always make the right decision, but you can always make a decision and then make it right.
Yeah.
So on your list of things you're writing down that God told you to do, write down the things you think God told you to do. Okay? I'm not here to tell you that everything I think I hear God tells me is 100% accurate. But I've got a pretty good handle on the amount of time that I spend with God, the amount of time I study. I think I know God's character pretty well at this point. And I can pretty well discern what he's told me to do and what he hasn't. And even if you miss the mark, you're going to be much better off to have stepped out thinking you're following what God told you to do than you will be sitting still wondering.
Yeah.
So many people are sitting around waiting for God to tell them to do something, and God's sitting around waiting for somebody to do something that he's already told you to do.
Right.
So just get moving. Okay? It's not about, you've seen the motivational pictures, I'm sure, that life is not about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning to dance in the rain. It's all about perspective. You can't you can't change your point of view sometimes. Where you are looking at your situation is where you are looking at your situation. Nothing you can do about that. But you can change your perspective, and you can see it from somebody else's point of view. I suggest God's point of view. That one seems to work out really well. Okay, so take a look at everything that you have going on. If the wind is against you, sometimes it's clear. To Jonah, it was clear. He knew why the wind was against him. He had messed up big time, and he's like, I'm sorry guys, just toss me over. I'm going to sink this ship. But when that happens, and you turn to God and say, I'm sorry God, I know I've been totally going against what you told me to do. He's like, that's all right. I'll send a big whale by, gobble you up, and spit you out on the shore. You'll be okay.
Yeah.
So even when you're going in the wrong direction, God's got the mercy to fix that.
Yes.
Just turn it around. And when you're going in the right direction and the wind is still against you, understand that what is happening to you is happening for you. All right, that's what I've got for you this afternoon. Go write those things down and walk them out. Don't look at the wind that you see. Listen to what God's told you. Thank you.